Side-scrollers have always been a staple genre in the early days of video games. Although rather simple, by allowing the player to maneuver their on-screen character in relation to their two-dimensional space, video game movement and control has always established what makes these particular genres fun to play. In later generations, improved hardware would evolve the 2D space to the 3-dimensional, allowing platforming games to expand their maneuverability. While this is true with virtually every modern video game today, some have continued to utilize the traditional 2-dimensional space to achieve fun and creative ideas, whether through more complex gameplay, greater creative and graphical expression, or using storytelling to make you feel bad because you finally decided to go on a genocide run. 2D side-scrollers have always remained fun and recognizable by just about everyone. 10 years ago, Shovel Knight landed on the 2D scene as a very awesome side-scrolling platformer. Not only did it excel at invoking the 8-bit era days of video games with its pixelated graphics and 8-bit inspired music, the game had very fluid and precise controls, making it a great platformer. It was well received and often accepted to be one of the best side-scrollers ever. With that said, it's been nearly 10 years and there has been a plethora of 2D side-scrollers that have dominated the market now. Games like Hollow Knight have gone in the direction of the Metroidvania, the classical explore and adventure formula that has always stuck around. Dead Cells dipped its feet into the roguelites to make sure that every run feels unique and fresh no matter what. Nintendo, well, they're still doing what Nintendo does best, since Mario has sort of been there before it all. And lastly, Wario, well, not exactly Wario, finally owns a pizza shop. But of course, there is a lot of other side-scrollers that I have yet to mention, which also deserve their own spotlight too. But, with that being said, how does Shovel Knight feel as a game 10 years later, now that everything else is here? Well, let's take a look. Upon starting the first level, I was immediately reminded of how fluid the controls were. For only having to worry about moving, jumping, and attacking, Shovel Knight feels genuinely good to play again. I believe this is primarily attributed by the fact that his movement feels precise. Good mid-air control has always been a hallmark for side-scrollers, and Shovel Knight's is precise enough that platforming never feels stiff. I always felt like I had a good command of my jumps, and I was able to adjust as needed. He doesn't feel as overtly floaty as, say, Mario, but he has a similar level of control while he is airborne. Admittedly, it's much closer to how Mega Man jumps, but without the stiffness of moving left and right. Despite having played these mechanics a long time ago, the feeling of platforming and defeating enemies has never gotten stale. On top of his primary attack, which is a simple swing, he has the added ability to do a shovel drop attack, similar to pogo jumping in DuckTales. For me, it's the combination of these two mechanics that make Shovel Knight's platforming still worth it today. Defeating enemies to clear a pathway is simple and enjoyable, but the added benefit of head-bonking them makes jumping feel much more rewarding and creative. I can chain attacks on enemies, access secret puzzle locations, or just test how good I can chain my shovel drops. I always felt like the game was rewarding me for making good use of its platforming and combat mechanics. Overall, the movement and combat of the game are extremely simple but immensely enjoyable. Even for the 10-year lifespan of the game, the movement doesn't feel dated nor does it feel slow. There's nothing overly complex about it either, so if it's your first time playing, you can learn everything you need to know. Unless maybe you're some journalist who doesn't know how to beat Cuphead's tutorial? The rest of the game pretty much follows a simple formula. Go through each level and defeat the bosses that occupy them. This is very typical of the side-scrolling action formula, especially from the Mega Man series. While it may sound boring to have to do the same thing over and over again, even after coming back to the game, the variety in level design never got boring for me. Each area offered a different platforming challenge, and no two boss levels felt overly similar to me. Even though I knew that I had beaten each level before, I nevertheless had fun overcoming them again, no matter how many times I died. The next thing, and this is definitely the biggest thing that pretty much holds up for me, is the presentation. There is really not much to say about the graphics of the game because the pixel art speaks for itself. Sprites and animations evoke the aesthetics of the 8-bit retro era wonderfully, and it always feels like I've been taken back to that specific time period. Obviously, there's some creative liberties that make the game sound and feel more modern, but those additions never detracted from me appreciating its retroness. Personally, I feel like there's something iconic about pixel art presentation, maybe because it sort of feels more distinguishable from the graphics of other generations. A bit old, yes, but it nevertheless has a sense of uniqueness that feels timeless, even as modern-day graphics become more advanced. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, however, so if pixel art and 8-bit aesthetics aren't really your thing, you may not quite enjoy it as much. The same could be said for the music, which is another big reason why this game still holds up for me. Nearly every location in the game has its own specific music, and much of it is meant to invoke the theme and tone of the level. Plague Knight's theme, for example, sounds very mischievous. While King Knight's sounds very grand and gaudy. The sound effects are also great, and have a nice 8-bit crunch when played. These range from using the menu, combat interactions, as well as characters having their own sound effects during dialogue. I actually didn't notice this on my first playthrough, and I'm happy to know that the devs dedicated different sound effects just for each of the major characters. Speaking of characters, the story in Shovel Knight is actually something that I appreciate. It's nothing overly complicated. Shovel Knight has to stop a group of villainous knights known as the Order of No Quarter, and defeat the evil enchantress who has been spreading evil across the land. It's a simple heroic tale, but one that thematically fits Shovel Knight's setting. The part of the story that I loved, though, was the writing. Each character is written with bits and pieces of dialogue that come from their brief exchanges with Shovel Knight. While they only have so much on-screen time, the banter that they have is full of character and charm. Whether they are a major or minor character, there's always some entertaining dialogue that makes the world of Shovel Knight feel fun and adventurous. Even when I know the story isn't the most intricate or complicated, hearing Shovel Knight converse with each of the Knights of No Quarter, or any of the adventurers that he comes across, are some of my favorite moments in the game. There is also one small story element that I personally love that the game does extremely well. Although the campaign portrays Shovel Knight as a heroic knight ready to vanquish evil, the moments where Shovel Knight dreams of rescuing his dear Shield Knight are actually some of the more touching moments in the game. The implication that there may be some regret in his heart, or that he is preparing himself to one day rescue her, adds more depth to an otherwise mostly heroic Shovel Knight. The final ending sequence only serves to further drive home these moments as the story comes to an end. Shovel Knight's campaign is also fairly short, so you can typically finish the game in a couple of hours if you dedicate a single sitting. I believe this is also what gives the game some points as to why it's still fun to pick up even after all these years. Since the gameplay is straightforward and the completion time short, you don't have to dedicate too much time in finishing the game. And you can always handle it in bite-sized chunks whenever you feel like it. It also helps that it's pretty much available on every major gaming platform, meaning that if you want to play it on the go, you can take your Switch, Steam Deck, or your 3DS if you've still got it lying around. Personally, it's either the Switch or my PC, which has always allowed me to access the game whenever I want. Now, I could talk about so many different details when it comes to maybe nitpicking or providing my theories as to why I think Shovel Knight is probably one of the best 2D side-scrollers in the world, but ultimately, going back to Shovel Knight feels fun because, well, there hasn't really been that many platforming-style games in the same vein. The original Mega Man series comes to mind, but Shovel Knight is meant to be the modern evolution of many of its inspired franchises, so it really wouldn't be a fair comparison. There have also been numerous 2D side-scrollers since then, each dipping into their specific genres that make them unique amongst everyone else. Sometimes you want to scratch that Metroidvania itch, or a roguelite just to make a 2D side-scroller fun with RNG in the works. Yet, no matter what genre, beneficial or otherwise, Shovel Knight still stands proudly amongst them, even though he's, well, really not that tall, honestly. Although I've experienced it all before, the charm of Shovel Knight's package fits so well together that it always makes a revisit to the game worth it. Simple and straightforward gameplay, 8-bit inspired pixelated graphics and music, fun and charming characters who feel witty and lively in all of their caricature. All of this rounds out an amazing side-scrolling retro-inspired package that everyone who is interested should give a try, or even revisit. Not only does the original campaign hold up, but the addition of the other character campaigns only further adds to the Shovel Knight experience. Plague Knight, Spectre Knight, and King Knight are very fun additions to the overall setting, and deserve your attention if you want the full treasure trove experience. So yeah, I have to say, for a game that was released over 10 years ago, Shovel Knight still holds up extremely well for those who may want that awesome, retro-inspired side-scrolling experience, and I'm sure you guys will like it. Well, that's me guys. It's been fun making this video, and I'm planning on revisiting some other games that are on the fairly aged side, especially one coming around the corner. So until then, thanks for your time, and thanks for checking me out. See you all next time.